much for being here. So just a disclaimer, I might look like a Filipino, a kabayan. However, I do not actually know how to speak Tagalog. Maybe just a few words here and there, but not very useful. So as much as possible, I'll be speaking in English, and if you have questions, please also speak in English. That would be really helpful for me. So as you know, over the past few years, we've witnessed firsthand how tropical cyclones impact lives, livelihoods, and infrastructure across the Philippines. From communities bracing for the storm to the swift mobilization of resources, these experiences have underscored the importance of acting ahead of disasters. So thank you to the previous speakers, Rhoda, Nina, and Christoph, who set the scene in terms of the macro perspective of what AA looks like here. Today, we want to spend today's session to delve into the real-world accounts of how Start Ready activations have supported vulnerable communities during these critical moments. So through these stories, we'll identify what worked, what didn't work, and what we can improve on. So this is a chance to really build on the collective knowledge and of the implementers, partners, and communities, ensuring that every lesson learned becomes a stepping stone to a more effective response in the future. So joining us in the session today, I'm happy to invite Noemi Kabadu, who is the Executive Director of St. Paul University Philippines Community Development Center Foundation, and Dr. Eula Bianca Villar, who has been the lead of the doxury evaluation lead researcher. So without further ado, I will invite Ms. Noemi Kabadu to join us. And just as a brief introduction, she is the Executive Director of St. Paul University Philippines Community Development Center Foundation and the DRF Project Coordinator of SPUPCDC. She earned her bachelor's degree in social work and master's degree in social work at St. Paul University Philippines, and completed her doctorate degree in public administration in June 2024 in the same university. So please join me in welcoming her to share some of her experiences so far.
Thank you, Joyce. Good morning, and I am happy that I'm part of this important learning activity with START Network. And thank you for that introduction, Joyce. My presentation, entitled Hindsight, Insight, and Foresight, the Start Ready Tropical Cyclone Taksuri and Chami activations, the DRF Cagayan Consortium experience, is actually focused on the disaster risk financing experiences during cyclone activation. Okay? When we speak of the cyclone activation, we actually had two. The first one was Typhoon Doksuri, or Igay, in 2023, and recently Tropical Cyclone Chami, or Christine, and this is just recently in October 23 of 2024. My presentation delves into the experiences as a consortium member when Start Ready activated the Super Typhoon Doksuri, and how anticipatory action in Camalaniugan and the emergency response are carried out in the three municipalities of Cagayan, which is Bagao, Camalaniugan, and Gataran. So as local partner of the Disaster Risk Financing Cagayan Consortium, I was actually tasked by the consortium team to represent the consortium's learnings in today's learning session. And the consortium members actually consist of our two INGO partners, of which we have Relief International and the Humanity and Inclusion as our lead consortium. We have one national NGO, the PhilRads, and two local organizations, Green Meadow and our organization. So on my presentation, is divided into three parts. First is the hindsight, the second is the insight, and the third, the foresight. Okay? So allow me now to present my presentation, our work, and its importance. The Disaster Risk Financing Cagayan Consortium actually aims to craft responsive contingency plan for a typhoon event. We actually maximize the resources to conduct social preparation activities to ensure that all targeted stakeholders are involved in the design of the contingency plan. Project inception activities were also conducted with the local government units who are all very supportive from the municipal to the barangay level to build strong partnership among the START network members, the DRF Cagayan Consortium, the local government, the organizations of persons with disabilities, and with the community stakeholders. Moreover, consultations with the most at-risk groups such as the women, the youth, the farmers, the fisher folks, the older persons, and persons with disabilities were also consulted through the key informant interviews, through focus group discussions, to ensure appropriateness of actions. We also conducted contingency planning consultation workshops to elaborate the contingency plan. Prior to the activation of Typhoon Egay in 2023, contingency plan in Camalaniugan is already in place. And other preparedness activities in the consortium were actually conducted, which includes pre-identification and selection of beneficiaries, series of project orientation, consultations. We also did develop SOP, and that is for the multi-purpose cash assistance. We also did supplier mapping. We developed IEC materials. We conducted vulnerability assessment, identifying communities at risk, particularly those in coastal and low-lying areas. Coordination from the provincial to the municipal to the barangay level was also conducted. But prior to the actual Doksuri activation, a dry run was conducted. Thanks to Typhoon Mawar. You know the story. There exists pre-award, fund transfer, withdrawal of funds, and then ultimately return of funds due to non-activation. That was really a tricky story. If I have time, then I would share, but of course, I won't have the time, okay? So during the DRF July 2020 Doksuri activation, we were able to support 252 households who received multi-purpose cash assistance during anticipatory action. And for early response, we were able to support at least 18,505 individuals or 3,701 households who also received multi-purpose cash assistance to address their food, security, and livelihood needs. Targeting household with older persons, persons with disabilities, children under 5, women-headed households, the solo-headed households. Also, 8,035 individuals receive wash assistance through the provision of hygiene kits with water purification tablets and hygiene promotion sessions. 113 older persons and persons with disabilities have actually accessed humanitarian services through individual assessments made by the physiotherapist and distribution of assistive devices. And of course, 263 individuals were trained on risk communication. This involves awareness sessions on gender-based violence and child protection. And of course, they were also given IEC materials. So while Typhoon Christine activation for October, recently, October 23, 2023, that was the second typhoon activation, no, by the Start Ready. We were able to support 750 households who receive MPCA, and we also provided 210 asset protection boxes to 4 public elementary schools, 1 daycare center, and 3 health centers. And these 750 households also received the IEC materials that we prepared, which speaks on the multi-purpose cash assistance, how it is supposed to be utilized, and the gender-based violence, IEC materials, PISEA, and child protection. Now we proceed with our the work that we did. Activation, no, disaster risk financing anticipatory action was actually activated as it reached its threshold on July 23, 2023. And this is 55 hours before impact. So as you can see in the slides, in July 18, an LPA entered the Philippine Area of Responsibility. It intensified in 72 hours. We received information and or confirmation from the 510 model through Start Ready governance team that the triggers have been met and that the AA activation was approved. Upon approval, the consortium immediately mobilized resources and conducted cash distribution to the pre-identified 252 households. And days after, on July 25, Doksuri intensified into a super typhoon and met a very high scenario, thus activating early response. Next slide. Okay, so that's the model that we used, and anticipatory action in Camalaniugan was activated in moderate scenario with 252 beneficiaries, while ER was activated with a very high scenario as Super Typhoon Doksuri intensified in just within 12 hours. Okay, so for our key insights from the activation, we were asked what was surprising. Okay, based on the consultations with the stakeholders and the municipal local government units, cash interventions were actually the preferred modality for the target barangays. We have CP in Camalaniugan then. However, based on the feedback during distributions and market assessment, in-kind assistance was the more suitable modality. So when the consortium developed the contingency plan for Bagao and Gataran, the modality already included family food packs for Bolas Point and Valley Cove, which are considered GIDA areas. And when we speak of a GIDA area, for you to reach this barangay of only 250 households, either you ride a boat for how many hours? 4 to 6 hours, or ride a plane. Okay. This is in the 2 GIDA areas. Accordingly, Start Ready, no, is still on the insights from the LG level. Start Ready is the only program that actually provided cash assistance in anticipation of a typhoon. This is very different from the previous experiences of traditional government response. Another surprising is that the strategy of risk financing appears to be surprising in the LGU for us, no? The DRF has pre-agreed plans and actions, okay? We also have pre-selected beneficiaries and pre-agreed financing. So this is something new to them. Capacity building within the consortium partners. We actually underwent QGIS training for risk mapping. We also had trainings on disability data collection using the WGQ. We also underwent Ready for Action or REACT training. There were also meal trainings which enhance the consortium members' understanding of anticipatory action, which actually better prepared the consortium for future activations. Participation of the consortium members in inter-consortium learning exercises and exchanges also transpired. I am happy that one of our local consortium members went to Germany and Nepal just to share her DEXIRI experiences. And we were also happy that we were part of the Asia Ministerial Conference where we also shared our learnings and challenges. Okay? And speaking of our learnings and challenges, okay, these are just few of the learnings, challenges, and best practices that we as a consortium came up with. So it is actually divided in 3 parts. The first part would be the challenges and best practices which we got from our local LGU partners. The second one is within the consortium. And the third one is gathered from our project participants or beneficiaries. Okay, so with the local government units and the barangay local government units, among the challenges transpired and or mentioned was that there was really difficulty to introduce and or explain the anticipatory action concept as it is new to them. AA concept is also new to us local partners, but with the capacity building that we had, we were able to adopt and understand better what anticipatory action is. And also, lack of awareness of anticipatory action among the program beneficiaries themselves. What they know is that there is support being distributed, but they don't really know why they are receiving such. So it is really an effort, a tiring practice that we have to do it over and over again just for the beneficiaries to have better appreciation of what anticipatory action is. With the DRF Cagayan Consortium, activation while contingency planning was ongoing. You see, during EGAI activation, we are still into the National Reserve Fund implementation. We have done all those preparatory activities, pre-identification, selection, community orientation. Here comes Typhoon Doksuri. So would you imagine how difficult those moments were? But we were happy that we activated. Why? Because there was support. There was a big support coming for our municipality. Successive cyclones, the onset of typhoon, not only Egay, but Falcon. If you know them, please tell them not to go back. Goring and Hana. This all happened immediately right after Typhoon Egay. And then of course, communication problems would always be an issue. Internet, services, mobile services, all down. And then of course, during the anticipatory action distribution, we were fearful of the safety, because this is actually a challenge. The safety and security considerations for the staff and the program beneficiaries using the direct cash distribution. Why? Because we were still crafting then the CP for Bagao and Gataran, no? And so we do not have yet established frameworks for financial service providers. So we did direct cash. Okay? Can we go to the next slide for the challenges with the, okay. So for the program participants, still, of course, we would always be concerned of the safety of our beneficiaries. And for the DRF model processes, this is a challenge maybe because, of course, they would tell us, focus on the typhoon scenario. But of course, successive cyclones, multi-hazards, and then of course, additional triggers, and or what we are saying is that if there is a possibility of them including rainfall and the opening of the gates of the dams. Next, balik po tayo sa first. Okay. Now, on the best practices, DRF in Cagayan is only 2 years old, right? Merely 1 year and 6 months today. Okay. So, but prior to our engagement in the pilot municipalities, we already have close connection with the pilot municipalities. So we consider good working relationship established with the municipal LGU and barangay LGUs as our best practice. They do not know AA. Limited knowledge on AA. But imagine accepting these organizations, telling stories like, wondering what are we talking about? But they are here, okay? While LGUs had preemptive evacuation that made them busy during activation, resources were still allocated to complement the needs of the response activities of the consortium. Because we always know that government should lead response efforts. We are just there to provide support and to at least fill the gap if there is a need. So even amid network issues, it was easy to communicate because of established communication protocols. Okay, we will tell you if you will ask us, what are those established protocols? Okay. For the DRF Cagayan Consortium, the shift to financial service provider promoted economic inclusion of beneficiaries. It ensured safety of staff and beneficiaries and provided opportunity to scale the anticipatory action intervention from 252 households in Egay to 750 households during the Typhoon Christine activation. And from one municipality, that is Camalaniugan, to 3 municipalities, adding to that Bagao and Gataran. Okay? We also strengthen social preparation. Why? Because of the developed standard operating procedures. We organize AA committees in the DRF areas. We have a lot of barangays in each of the municipalities, and it is critical that we have regular volunteers with us. Reason that we establish AA committees in each of the barangays. Yun yung communication protocols na sinasabi natin dito. Okay? Good communication channels and feedback mechanisms with the consortium lead. Imagine, even if our consortium lead is in Manila, we are on the know on what is happening. Communication lines was very easy. We maximize the use of internet. Luckily, we have internet communication allowance in the funds, because if that is absent, then I don't know what will happen. Thank you for that. Okay. Pakidagdagan. Joke lang. Previous experiences with Mawar. Okay, before Egay. Okay, previous experiences with Mawar acted like a simulation exercise for the consortium. Because in the end, although the funds were released to us, it was not disbursed because there was no activation. Thank you. Because of Typhoon Mawar, nagkaroon kami ng simulation, and we did a good job during Typhoon Egay. A round of applause, please. Pampaalis po ng kaba, di ba? Okay. Also, one of the best practices that we identified as consortium is that the pre-identification of beneficiaries and contingency planning, which allowed for quick response. We would not know what to do without the contingency plan that we develop. Next slide. Ayan. And then, of course, during the beneficiary selection, there were consultative activities, and we actually vetted the list of beneficiaries, particularly in AA, to different stakeholders. That would mean from the barangay to the Municipal Social Welfare and Development Office to the DRR, as we have to be transparent on the list that we are providing them, so that to limit and or to mitigate questions after implementation. And for the DRF model, I think one or two of the best practices that we generated from our series of after action reviews is that the pre-identification of beneficiaries and contingency planning allowed for quick response, and that the DRF ER complements the LGU gaps at it filled in to address the needs of the households. Not only of the households, but it also augmented the limited resources of our partner local government units. Next slide. Okay, last na po ito. Okay. For the foresight, we have been reflecting as a consortium, and we have been looking into this, that we would consider, and we actually already considered during Typhoon Christine activation. But of course, this is a work in progress, which we still would want to present to you. Okay, we looking forward to expanding our beneficiary listing and to factor in care responsibilities, as there are a lot of households with senior citizens, with persons with disabilities, with children below 5 years old. We also feel the need for financial literacy program in our NRF to help beneficiaries budget the cash assistance that they would be receiving. Expand disaster immunization of worst-case scenario, recalibrate contingency plans to include multi-hazard incidents, successive incidents, and new incidents, and then include ER mechanism to entire province with the criteria and or prioritization of municipalities needing support and or assistance. And then DRF consortium building. Okay? Because we would not want to let just the consortium and the barangays to know what we are doing, but we would want this to reach a large scale. Ipangalandakan, kumbaga, in Tagalog. Sorry for that, guys. So DRF consortium building, accreditation, and or establishment of partnerships of local partners linking with the regional hubs and or other platforms for learning sessions maybe, and for scaling up DRF AA activities. And then, a credit consortium to the provincial DRRMO as CSO representatives. SPUP St. Paul as an academic institution is actually a member, an NGO representative of the provincial school board, while Green Meadows, the local NGO, is also representatives of the environment. But we are trying to accredit DRF Cagayan Consortium in the provincial local government, provincial local disaster risk reduction management. Actually, they already invited us. And then, of course, the need to establish communication plans, expansion of DRS system, because findings on the ground show the need for a system for flooding. And then, of course, information advocacy on anticipatory action is needed. And this is because due to the lack of understanding and experience on anticipatory action led to questions about the value of anticipatory interventions. And lastly, additional, sorry for this, but this is what we need, additional funds. Tumawang mga consortium because they also need that. Hindi lang kami. Additional NRF funds and develop proposals to sustain the human resources. Okay. And to close, I would like to share with you the story of Aling LV. Okay. There's no best words to explain the impact of DRF anticipatory action in Cagayan, but with this story. Nanay LV is 56 years old. Kindly Join me in reading. She is a farm laborer from Camalaniugan and had the means to stockpile food and hygiene items for the typhoon because of the cash assistance provided by the DRF Anticipatory Action. I was desperate the day that I received financial assistance from the DRF project. It has been several days since we were last able to farm due to continuous rains. As a farm laborer, rainy days mean we do not receive any salary. That day, we had no rice or anything to eat. Then there's the news of the coming typhoon. I was feeling hopeless, and this was recalled Nanay LV, who single-handedly takes care of her 3 children, one of whom has an impairment, the lady beside her. After receiving the financial assistance, Nanay LV immediately went to the market to buy rice, canned goods, noodles, and soap. The timing could not have been more perfect. The financial assistance helped my family in stockpiling food and hygiene items throughout the days that we could not work because of the typhoon, she said happily. Ito pong picture na to was taken 3 days after nag-visit sina Sir Arvin. Kasi hindi sila makapenetrate sa bahay nila kasi hanggang dito ang level ng tubig baha. So this is just one story that all the more inspired the consortium to do our work. And we hope for more support from the DRF, not just because we are a pilot, but because these people that we identified, that they identified, are those really needing DRF financing support. Thank you very much.
So I'm happy now to invite our next speaker up. So as Ms. Kabadu kind of shared her experience from the process side, her experience of implementing both the Doksuri and Trami interventions, I'd like to now invite Ms. Eula. So Dr. Eula Bianca Villar is a seasoned research consultant specializing in disaster risk management, climate change, and social impact. Her recent work includes leading the evaluation of Start Ready's activation during Typhoon Doksuri in 2023. Previously, she's collaborated with START Network on critical research projects such as scoping scientific models for anticipatory action and developing a comprehensive white paper on the Philippines anticipatory action ecosystem. So please join me in welcoming her today.
Yeah, I wanted to have my phone for my timer because it's hard to be the speaker before lunch. So I'm just going to, thank you so much, Annalisa. Okay, I'm just going to set a timer. Okay. Okay, so thank you very much. It was a very, very good introduction to the work actually of the local consortium. And the presentation that I'm actually going to do for this session is actually going to focus on what were the sentiments of the community beneficiary communities in relation to the massive work that the local consortium has actually done. So just before I start, I wanted to just acknowledge the team that actually helped me create this report. So Annalisa, and also the local consortium, specifically, of course, Ms. Noemi is there, and of course, Ms. Jonaline Aduru, and Ivy Sibel, she's also here, and another team member from the Cagayan group, Asel Malanot, she's actually not here. So I just wanted to acknowledge the work that they've actually done to do that. Great. If you can give them a round of applause. Thank you. Okay, so for the context of the work, I'm just going to stand over here. For the context of the work, so this is actually an almost finished work, and basically what we did in our team was to actually evaluate the work of the local consortium in Cagayan for the implementation and activation of Start Ready, specifically during Typhoon Doksuri in 2023. Typhoon Doksuri activation is actually an inaugural activation for Start Ready across the entire Philippines. So actually, that's the very, very first thing. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of insights that you can generate from it, including all of the best practices that was already iterated when they activated, I can imagine, during Typhoon Christine. So just in numbers, the amount of help that was actually given. So there were different types of assistance. There was cash assistance and non-cash assistance. In this report, we focused primarily on the cash assistance because that's the main differentiating and comparative factor between two specific groups that the local consortium was actually able to penetrate, namely the anticipatory action recipients and also the early response recipients. In numbers, you can imagine, and this is just ballpark, 630,000 worth of 630,000 pesos worth of multi-purpose cash assistance only for across 250 plus households, and the amount of early response assistance had a total value of almost 11.5 million. That actually doesn't include your non-cash assistance, which would include assistive devices, wash kits, among other things. So you can just imagine the scale that they actually did. So for this specific portion of the session, what I'm going to focus on is the impact findings of our research. In our research, we actually do have the impact findings and the process findings, but for this specific part, so you can imagine there's a lot of things that I'm not going to highlight, but for this specific part, I want to focus on the human narrative behind the data point that we see when we talk about the numbers and the amounts of money that we're actually giving. So what we want to be able to do is to surface the insights of the community beneficiaries regarding the impact of this project and to highlight the key learning points on the program's strength and areas of improvement, which a lot of things also are reinforced by the findings of the local consortium. So just very briefly, I'm going to be discussing a brief methodology for that part of our research, some key insights and recommendations. So for our methodology, just as a caveat, we came in 1 year after the activation. So as evaluation goes, there's a lot, of course, that already happened in between. And I just wanted to preface it with that because there's a lot of rebuilding of the memory that we have to actually do when we were actually on the field. But the one thing that stood out is a lot of the people did remember Start Ready because it was actually the very, very first time that they've experienced such a thing. So in terms of the reconstruction of the memory, we had to, of course, include different points to say, okay, we have to remind you that actually this was done, this was the context, this is what happened. And in general, they were actually able to remember it. We had 16 focus group discussion, FGDs, across the three penetrated local municipalities of Camalaniugan, Gataran, and Bagao. And we had specifically 8 FGDs for AA recipients, and this is actually specifically in Camalaniugan. And we had 8 FGDs for ER recipients, which were, there were 4 groups in Gataran and 4 groups in Bagao. The total data capture was 134 participants that represent actually 134 households. So we were very particular about that each participant was actually a recipient that represents one specific household. And more specifically, we had 67 AA recipients and also 67 ER recipients. Of course, in the FGDs, we basically had homogenizing factors. For instance, a group that is composed primarily of female and that they receive a specific type of help. If we just look at the entire data set that we actually had, so this shows you, so AA group is at the top, the red one, and then the blue one is the ER group. So if you'll notice here, the representation of female recipients between AA and ER group is actually quite high. So the people who were actually recipients of that, so gender plays actually an important role. And there are also people with reported disabilities or impairments. Now, in terms of the household size, because of course the amount of money that you get per household has to be stretched across members of the household, right? So if you're going to be looking at that, a majority of the recipients across both AA and ER actually have more than 2 households. And you're actually looking at a family of 5 usually. So mom, dad, and then maybe 2 or 3 children. And for those who have who actually who are part of households above 5, these are actually the ones with extended families, usually the in-laws or mother of mother, so grandmother and grandfather. And those below 2 or below 2, these are actually your widowers, senior citizens, mostly the people who are actually already old. I wanted to emphasize this because this is very important. The primary livelihood across both groups really is farming. So you can imagine, as was already actually emphasized in the previous sessions, that when a typhoon actually hits a specific barangay, the farmers are actually one of the groups that really suffer the most because they have sustained loss of income. Now, as I mentioned, I wanted us to focus on the human narrative behind the data point. So what we tried to do was we created composite personas based on the participants that we actually had. And these composite personas were actually run through deep AI so that we can actually generate specific faces so that you can imagine who are the people who actually receive these kinds of help. For the AA group, you have Maria, elderly widow with mobility challenges. These are the people who are actually needing the help, right? We have Pedro, he's a young farmer, age 35, with a family. And then you also have Anna, young mother, she's 29 years old, and she has a disability. She's not able to walk, right? For the ER group, you have Marilu. She's an indigenous woman with a family, and she's actually located in geographically isolated area. Benito is a middle-aged indigenous farmer, also living in a hard-to-reach barangay. And Leonardo, 65, is a senior citizen who despite being old, is still actually working as a farmer, okay? Now, what were their sentiments? So we had like 5 primary evaluation parameters to look at. So in terms of the first thing that we actually tried to look at was the relevance of the help. How relevant is the help that they actually received? First insight is that Start Ready is actually quite relevant for the community. So you have here, for example, on the topmost, you'd have the AA group, and then on the bottom is the ER group, just to show what the spread looks like. And what I wanted to emphasize here is that both groups felt that the cash assistance was actually an appropriate intervention that addresses their needs. However, the amount can be increased due to the high price in goods. So of course, I think the local consortium has already iterated that, and there's already an expansion in terms of the amount that is given. But this kind of insight was critical because the women who were actually going to the markets, they had better overview of what is needed in the house and how much the price inflation is actually. So that amount was actually important for them. The AA group felt empowered to take ownership of proactively managing their risk. The shift from reactive to anticipatory support was viewed as a major strength of the program. So for the AA group specifically, they felt that they were empowered to take ownership of how they were going to manage their risk to typhoon-related disasters, just because they already had access to resources. So you can imagine that sometimes the fact that you don't have access to a specific resource, that's the only thing that's hindering you from taking a proactive risk management. For the ER group, they're actually very thankful for the support, but as mentioned by Ma'am Noemi, there's preference for anticipatory assistance. Meaning, they were basically saying, during this time, we already don't have income, but also the markets are closed. And of course, we've already suffered all of the losses. It's gonna be harder for us to actually go to different places. So there's preference for cash assistance before and more non-cash assistance after the typhoon. So there's an opportunity to promote awareness on AA to also dispel misconceptions, because when we were talking to the ER group, basically they mentioned, you know, of course the help that was given, we're very thankful for that, but that's a little bit late already. But we also understand that it's okay that, you cannot give us the help. We do not qualify to receive help because we haven't shown you the proof yet that our houses have been damaged. So that's a misconception which was quite surprising to us, because we were saying, you deserve, it's a basic human right to actually be able to access resources to proactively manage your risk to these types of typhoon. It's not that you have to show that you have suffered in order for you to gain access to these resources. So another insight is, so we also looked at Start Ready as an instrument within the space to see if there's complementarity or if there's redundancy. And specifically for the Cagayan Consortium, this is actually the very, very first time they've experienced something like this. So if you will look at if they've received help, similar help from other organizations such as the local government or other NGOs in that space, they haven't received that. So they said this is actually the first time we did it. In the ER group, this farmer, he was actually able to receive small help from an NGO, cash assistance. Basically, he was saying that was something that I could use to actually supplement my recovery to livelihood. And in this regard, what I wanted to emphasize is Start Ready is regarded as a unique program and is actually considered a first mover of anticipatory action in the region. And there's actually a lot of opportunity to promote awareness and to basically influence the region's landscape and generate evidence on the impact of these kinds of programs. But as a first mover, as all first movers know, there's also a challenge such as gaining the support of critical actors, promoting knowledge about AA, and also addressing the misconceptions. The other thing that I also wanted to emphasize here is there's the flexibility of the multipurpose cash assistance. So when we think about helping vulnerable communities, there's a lot of ways we can help them, and often we're thinking, yeah, let's give them food packs, let's give them wash kits, let's give them this. But it was overwhelmingly surprising to us that they actually expressed high satisfaction for receiving multipurpose cash assistance, primarily because it allows flexibility for them to buy something that actually is reflective of their needs. So for example, sometimes there's a mismatch. You'll give wash kits to people who actually don't need wash kits because they already have that specific resource. Or you'll give assistive device to others. So of course that goes to the conversation of beneficiary targeting, and that's something that the local consortium has worked very hard on. But at the same time, the multipurpose cash assistance allows more freedom of choice. In terms of the third insight, which is on effectiveness, we saw that behavioral outcomes of the beneficiaries demonstrate the effectiveness of Start Ready. We looked at how long the cash was used. 2,500 pesos was actually stretched up to a week. And that's exactly what Start Network and the local consortium wanted to do. They wanted to give at least a week's worth of assistance to these people. So they were actually able to stretch it to a week. But there are others who actually tried to stretch it for 3 more weeks. And often this was contingent on whether you belong to a bigger household or a smaller household. So with the AA group, what did they do to use the money? They immediately secured their basic provisions to prepare for the typhoon, and that includes basic necessities like food. They also reinforced the structure of their houses. They stocked up on medicine. They avoided venturing out in the typhoon and subsequent floods, and they felt a sense of security. We don't think about that because probably we have access to all of these things, right? But when you go to the community and you go there, you think, actually that's true. You don't want to actually go out because you're gonna wade through floods in order for you to be able to afford something as basic but as important as medicine that will sustain you for the next 3 days, right? So that they felt that they had the dignity of taking ownership of managing their risk. In terms of the ER group, they suffered loss of income for actually up to 3 weeks or more. Because as mentioned by Ma'am Noemi, there was Falcon, Hana, and other typhoons. So the MPCA, the Multipurpose Cash Assistance, enabled them to get by the days when they did not have income to buy their basic needs. And this afforded them a sense of financial security without having to be in debt. Because otherwise, these people will have to be in this vicious cycle of being in debt. So women also played a critical role in house decision-making regarding the use and allocation of MPCA. This was a very interesting story because one of the men that we actually interviewed, we asked him, okay, so did you receive the money? And then he said, yes. So what did you do with the money? I immediately remitted it to my wife because my wife knows what we need at home. and therefore, she's the one who makes decisions on exactly what we're actually going to buy. And I think that's a very important finding, especially when we design our programs in relation to our beneficiary targeting and really reinforcing the role that women play in risk management, in disaster risk management. Fourth insight, and I think I have a couple more minutes. Fourth insight, Start Ready was efficiently delivered, as evidenced by high satisfaction of the community members. They were all very happy, like overwhelmingly satisfied that they actually received help, and they would welcome help, actually. But we also asked about, were there delaying factors? When you tried to reach this, when the cash was distributed or the non-cash assistance was distributed. And basically they said that the delaying factors, they were mostly logistical in nature. And this is where we actually have to more consciously think about access. So most of the people who reported delaying factors talked about accessibility issues. Breastfeeding mothers cannot go, senior citizens, persons with disabilities, persons who actually had to travel and pay for the transportation fee in order to go to the distribution point to actually get the money. So those are some of the things that we have to think about. And so they were asking for exploration of distribution points for people, especially with transportation issues, and especially for those hard-to-reach barangays. My last insight is in relation to sustainability. Of course, it's the first activation. And as first activation goes, there's a lot of things that can still be modified. So the question we ask here is, do you think this is a program that can be repeated and should be repeated? And overwhelmingly, they actually said, this is essential for building our own capacity to manage disaster risk. And cash assistance that were provided, it provided access to critical resources that would have otherwise been unattainable due to financial constraints of the AA group. Meanwhile, if you're looking at the ER group, they benefited from the cash assistance, which helped them acquire their resources during a period of prolonged income instability. So I think what I wanted to highlight there is, if you're looking at AA recipients, you're looking at looking at the behavior that allows them to proactively manage their risk. And when you're looking at the ER group, you're basically looking to substantiate the source of income for prolonged income loss of the people who were actually affected. So there's huge impact that projects like Start Ready and everyone else who are doing anticipatory action can make in this regard. We asked them, what's your desire to modify the program? And basically, the proposed modifications to the program predominantly aim to expand. So it's a very expansionary kind of mindset. Like what Ma'am Noemi mentioned, they said, maybe we cannot just look at typhoon, maybe we can look at flooding, maybe we cannot, for the farmers, maybe we can also look at drought. They were also looking at expanding the program's reach, and basically they were saying, if we are able to actually see the impact for us, what about our neighbors, right? So these kinds of things. And if possible, increase the level of the cash assistance. Because really the access to cash is something that it remains a stumbling block actually for them to be able to access the most basic things that you think are human rights to actually, it's your human right to actually have that. So what now? Findings from our evaluation actually provides evidence that given the opportunity, vulnerable communities will take ownership of managing their risk to typhoon. They want to. They're just really blocked by the fact that they don't have access to that resource. So with the MPCA, they're actually able to manage their risk with dignity. And I wanted to emphasize that because they're not just receiving money just to buy whatever they want to buy. They're actually receiving money to be able to manage what their lives can look like for the next weeks. So they're not just thinking about it on a day-to-day basis, which they often do, especially for people who are in the farming communities. MPCA, as an instrument of assistance, allowed the beneficiaries the dignity of choice to purchase the needs that meet their context. When given before a typhoon, people felt physically and financially secure to access basic necessities. But when they're disbursed after a typhoon, they can also be used by the farmers to mitigate income loss. And then I think what I also wanted to emphasize is there's a complementarity on the types of assistance provided. It's not just cash we can provide. We can also provide non-cash assistance, which actually under the program of Start Ready you do. But in terms of when to give it is actually quite critical. Often there's preference for cash before a typhoon and food packs, non-cash assistance after a typhoon, especially because it's harder for you to get out of your house to actually do it, right? Last slide. Start Ready provides substantial help to vulnerable communities. But again, the big question as well, I think not just for Start Network, but also for all of those who are involved in anticipatory action, specifically with the provision of multipurpose cash assistance, is there's a need to reflect on how do we address the root cause of the vulnerability. And for these people is limited access to secure livelihood. It remains a stumbling block, specifically for the farmers. So maybe there are, because there are activation periods and non-activation periods of the AA, so maybe complementary programs that promote sustainable solutions to skill development during non-activation periods can probably build resilience. And I think that's actually what you guys are thinking about, right? And some points for reflection, mainly for Start Network, but also for actors who are in that field. I think Oxfam is there, WFP is there, I think FAO is also there. There's a need to continuously build the evidence that this kind of initiative works. And there's a need for it, there's a demand for it. So the more activations you can do, of course you don't want a lot of activations because that means there are more typhoons, right? But the more activations there are, the more swiftly we have to be able to generate the evidence to show that there is impact. And because when there is impact, then maybe the powers that be, right? The critical partners who will move this kind of projects will say, like the local government will say, okay, maybe we want to integrate that into our practices. And eventually, in the long term, maybe Start Network can play a more supportive and facilitative role to the AA ecosystem. And I mean, the ideal scenario is the government takes, the lead in it, right? And I think that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
We can spend about 20 minutes to see if anyone had any questions for the two speakers today. If not, I have plenty, but I will give it to the floor for the audience first to see if anyone has any raised hands. Yes, over at the back.
Good morning again. Once again, I'm Jake Agda from LGU Borongan. So my question is for the first speaker. And my question is, actually, you've mentioned yung contingency planning. So it's a big part for the AA activation. So saang part sa contingency plan yung AA doon? And also, since you have parang nakapag-simulate na kayo last year for the Typhoon Mawar, tama ba? Oo. Like, may contingency plan na ba kayo noon that time? And since based on your presentation, for the reference of our city also, we'd like to have somewhat a copy of your contingency plan. Because it's a big part of the activation of the AA. Thank you.
Do you want to use this one? It's a bit short.
Thank you, Sir Jake. Tama po ba pangalan? Okay. Anticipatory action is actually forms part of the contingency plan. The reason why we did the contingency plan, it's because we would like to act proactively. Okay? So yung contingency plan, noong activation ng Doksuri, we only have one contingency plan, and that is for Camalaniugan. For anticipatory action, we utilize the contingency plan for Camalaniugan. Reason that we already have pre-identified 252 households for the moderate scenario. Without that contingency plan, we as local consortium would be cramming on who to serve first And baka magkamali kami ng targeting. That is one of the importance of why we develop first contingency plan. As to the succeeding emergency response, no, kasi that is also part of the anticipatory action. Ang aming emergency response were difficult. Why? Kasi nga hindi pa ganon kapalyado yung aming CP. And so what happened was that during the activation of EGAI, the consortium team would do survey. Nagkaroon kami ng household interviews, which took us about 1 week bago pa man kami nagkaroon ng pre-identified list for ER. But kung present na sana si contingency plan, alam na sana namin kung saan, kung sino talaga yung mapupuntahan ng tulong. So we would say anticipatory action really, no, requires us having the contingency plan. And that was, CP was actually funded through NRF, Mami Ann, right? No? Right. Okay. And it was not that easy kasi nga, lahat kami sa consortium local, hindi namin alam anong ginagawa namin. Because later lang dumating yung mga capacity building namin. But we are fortunate that we have RI, that we have HI, who actually made us understand what we are doing. And that facilitated the crafting, the development, and the utilization of the CP. I don't know if I answered your question, Sir Jake, pero kung ikaw nandito, kakabahan ka din.
Sir, does that answer your question? Is okay? Okay. Oh yeah, another question over there.
Hi. Good morning, ma'am. Thank you for sharing your process. That's very inspiring. I'm Errol from CRS. I'm just curious to know about the NPCA. My question would be, how do you identify the process of identifying the actual amount of the cost of NPA, one that is not in conflict with the current standard of the SWD, or it's not destabilizing the economic, and also since the PHW has also received this, how do you ensure that the value of the NPCA is not, making conflict and not doing nothing harm in the community? Thank you.
Hindi ko ni-research yan, Sir Errol. But based on experience, 2,500 would sustain a family of 3 to 4 in 1 week. Kasi definitely after the typhoon or before the typhoon, before the onset of any typhoon, 3 days before, doon walang kakayahang maghanap buhay ang isang pamilya. So the decision of providing 2,500 was actually based on the expenditure of 3 to 5 members of a family in 1 week. Kasi mahirap din po kami. So nabubuhay lang kami sa 300 pesos in a day. So those are the sharings of our program participants during our interviews with them. Pero wala pa, hindi pa naman nila alam that we will be providing such financial support to them. So indeed, if we are to look into the DSWD assistance, which is amounting to 750 before, in 2023, nakakasupport yun ng family of 4 to 5 also in 1 week time. And how much more with this? Pero sabi nga natin, walang sapat. Hindi magkakaroon ng sapat sapagkat ang pangangailangan ng isang tao or ng pamilya ay nagdepende dun sa pang-araw-araw na buhay. And so, that decision is actually based on consultation, based on data gathering, and based on the feedback we got from the target beneficiaries and from the local government units. Ibinangga din namin sa market study. So,
If that's okay. Just very quickly to add to that as well, because you were asking how it complements the different actors who are also providing, right? Because we asked this as well. When we were doing the interviews with the LGUs and the barangay level, I wanted to just emphasize that the local consortium really worked hard to build that relationship with the local governments so that the local governments can say, okay, this is the area that you need covered and this is the area that you actually need covered. So I think that's also very helpful in terms of looking at not just the consultation, but also talking to the MSWD, talking to the MDREAMO, because you pair up with the MSWD. So everybody is very consultative, high stakeholder engagement, actually, I have to say, yeah.
Yeah. Good morning. Bong Masagka from PDRRN. I have 4 questions, actually. One is, are there attempts that for deviation in terms of the parameters, considering that you have 2 activations already? Are there attempts to deviate the parameters of the model? That's the first question. This is basically considering that Dr. Bercy this morning also shared about how to integrate local knowledge, you know, in overall, you know, response or AA activities. The second one is what levels ng CP? Is it community level contingency plan or at the municipal level contingency plan in terms of integrate related to the first question? And third, what is basically the role of the local government units, specifically the municipal government, in terms of the development and also the decision making in terms of when to activate or not? No? So that's, then sa huli siguro, what are the takeaways of LGUs? No? Looking at the good practices, mayroon na ba na concrete pronouncements? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Can I just make sure that I've understood your question? So the first one is about the model, like how it activates, is that correct? The trigger thresholds?
Yeah, my question actually is, are there attempts for deviation in terms of the parameters of the model, considering that there are already 2 activations and there are a lot of learnings already?
I think it's about the model, whether the model deviates from the actuator.
Okay. Yeah. I'll pass that question to Eula to explain about the model, but if not, then we also have other colleagues in the room who can answer for that.
Yeah, so Arvin can answer the question. So, sir, just to briefly repeat, your question was what were the key learnings in the use of the model, and if the model actually, when it in the previous activation, if it deviated from the actual scenario? Is that the question? Yeah.
Because the 510 model basically is looking at the
Wind
the
speed.
impact to shelter.
Yes,
right?
through wind speed.
Are
Yes.
there other parameters
Yes,
that
yeah.
START Network is now considering
Yeah.
for, you know, more development of that?
Yeah. So I can briefly answer that question just because I had an interview with Arvin. But if you want to have more in-depth discussion on that. So currently 510 model is the best model that we can use specifically for tropical cyclones because based on everything else, all else considering, it's the most complete and most penetrative model that they can actually do. And it's the most flexible because the model that START Network is using, it's not one time only. It actually has tiered approaches. So for example, if the severity of there's rapid intensification and you've already activated at a certain level, let's say moderate level, and then suddenly tomorrow there will be severity, this 510 model that uses that parameter of wind speed is the only thing that's currently is responsive to the actual context of START Network, wherein they want the flexibility of reactivation. So I think, are you trying to look at other parameters? We talked about that. You are, right? But it's a lot of work, right, at the moment.
Okay, I'll join the panel. So in terms of the model, just to add into that, Sir Bong. Actually, while this is the second activation, this is already the third year of Start Ready. The first year there was no activation, and with that there was a there was a review of the model. So the in-country decision-making group or governance team lowered the return periods. So that's the first change in terms of the models. But in terms of looking into other parameters, that's another detail that needs to be looked into, because based on the current study of 510 that was conducted, in terms of impact-based, using an impact-based forecast, the projected impact to shelters is the most, in a way, the closest to show the impact to the area. So that's the current scenario. If there is a possibility to improve it, that's something that we are still working on as well. Not only Start Network, but also the Red Cross and even the UN, because all of three organizations are using the same model. So I think that's the main thing in terms of the model side.
The other
Because
question.
sir was asking on what level is the contingency plan. The contingency plan we developed was actually the contingency plan of the DRF Cagayan Consortium. The participation of the LG would be more on a consultative, verifying if the contingency plan would really actually fit the condition, the situation, the gaps, and the current state of the municipalities. So to answer, sir, the CP was actually at the consortium level.
For the first speaker, you mentioned for the effective implementation of your AA and ER, first you conducted a pre-identification of your beneficiaries, and also you did conduct social prep activities. So may I know what were the criteria used in your pre-identifying your beneficiaries, and what constitutes your social preparation activities?
Okay. To further the participation of my fellow consortium members, may I request a member from the consortium? Okay. We really do have, sino may mag-volunteer ba saan? Mami Ann, please come over. Sige na. Yan. Exposure. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. For the vulnerability criteria, first is that we ensure that the household has either children below 5 years old, persons with disability, elderly, lactating and pregnant women, member of the IP community, and it's the household head will be solo parent, female-headed household with impairment, probably also a minor, person with disability at the same time, older person. So that's how we have the vulnerability criteria, and that we rank it accordingly. So basically, we ask from the barangay who are these vulnerable groups, and then we do one house-to-house interview with these households, and then we rank it, and then those who, based on that ranking, is that those who qualify under the 250 households, that's how we identify those households or the beneficiaries for the AA as well as for the ER.
Thank you so much.
But there's one more question. How was the social preparation? So may I request Ma'am Jo to speak? Okay, to speak about the social preparations, please. Thank you.
Okay? Sige.
Parang feeling ko nasa classroom lang. Okay, thank you, Ma'am Jo.
Ay, okay. Sige.
What were the social preparations activities we had? I know we operated for 4 months, February to April. So there are a lot of things that we did. Please mention them. Thank you.
Okay. For the social preparations, we conducted a focus group discussion, a series of consultation to the community, to the identified barangays, and of course, from barangay and then to the municipal level, so series of consultations with them, particularly during the crafting of the contingency plan. So, and then after the beneficiary selection, we also conducted beneficiary orientation for the beneficiaries to really understand what is AA, the process now, because it's very important to discuss with them the process. How is it that these households were identified as beneficiaries? Of course, with the participation of the community, we open the discussion, the beneficiary orientation to the community, actually for them to understand and of course to, because most of the people wanted to be included as a beneficiary of the project. However, we always explain to them that we only have limited target beneficiaries. We could not accommodate them all. So that's why we are having this beneficiary selection for us to really select and to identify the most vulnerable households. So those were the social preparations that we are doing in Cagayan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cho.
Okay, sorry. Gusto ko pa sana, sir, mag-answer.
Oh, okay. Sorry, we're just running a bit low on time. I think there were 2 more questions, so we'll take them both together for the panelists to answer.
Okay, good morning. I am Mosquisa of Caritas Borongan, one of the consortium in Eastern Samar. So my question is, how are you able to harmonize or complement the existing contingency plan of the LGU, especially that we understand there is a DRRM fund of the LGU, and I suppose with this project was able to complement that DRRM fund. So you make your own contingency plan, but there is also an existing contingency plan of the LGU. So how were you able to harmonize that contingency plan?
Okay, maybe I'll answer because that was part of our evaluation for the process of Start Ready. So one of our critical findings was that we understood that Start Network wanted to be very locally driven, and therefore the level of empowerment and capacity building at the local consortium was critical, because then in the process of it, if you're going to look at the critical stakeholders from Start Network to the local consortium, to the beneficiary communities, and then there's the layer of the local government unit. Basically what happens is the local consortium is the broker of the spaces between Start Network, between the local government and the barangay also, right? And the beneficiary communities. So to be able to harmonize the contingency plan, we asked this question. It was only possible because of the relationship that the local consortium built with the local government. So the first preparation that they really had to do, which the local government, by the way, was very happy to tell us. They said, first and foremost, they did not just come in and say, we want to do this. They asked us, what can we do to help you, right? So that was a critical question. And therefore, they opened up and then they said, okay, these are the instruments that we had. And it's not just the contingency planning instrument that they shared and tried to harmonize so that there's no redundancy. It's also the validation of the beneficiary listing. So I wanted to emphasize, for example, that for the local consortium of Cagayan, they had triple validation of the beneficiary listing at the level of the barangay, at the level of the local, and then, of course, their own autonomous validation. So contingency planning, in order to harmonize it alongside other instruments, the local consortium's role and the unique role and unique relationship that the local consortium has built with the local government was critical. Because then they open up and then they say, okay, we're already doing this. Okay, maybe we can implement this together. But also, that is not to eclipse the fact that the local government in this regard is playing more a supportive role to the implementation of anticipatory action rather than the leadership role, because they don't have the capacity yet. And in the end, I think what you aim to do is to flip that, right? So I hope that answers.
Thank you. We'll move on to the last question, if that's all right. Yep.
So this entire AAFBF is towards localizing the entire thing. But we need to ask specific questions. One, exactly what kind of financing is AAFBF? So, because apparently based on what's happening, the best practices, etc., AAFBF, given its origin from Red Cross, etc., is for early recovery, focusing on livelihood, agri, fisheries, shelter, income supplement, health, and food. So in trying to capture that, it's actually local risk layering, meaning given a risk, a specific risk, what specific financial arsenal will be provided. But having said that, I'm sure the LGUs, what the LGUs are actually asking here is exactly what is the entry point of AAFBF in local DRRM planning process. Is it contingency planning? Is it response operations? And let me mix it, because for contingency planning, there's massive chaos on that, and I'm sure our friend from the LGA might be able to confirm this. We have the DILG approach on the LISTO, then there's LCCAP, there's LDRRMP, and we have the updated NDRRM plan. But it's all chaotic for local government units. And we are trying to place exactly where AAFBF is in all of this. Even for contingency planning, who here can tell me there's a specific guideline on exactly what contingency planning is for local government? The answer is there are so many, it's so confusing. And then you'll try to locate, this is where AAFBF will be. So it's asking the question, how can you locate it as entry point in local planning process, which is chaotic itself? And add to that the emergence of the AAFBF in the Global Dialogue Platform of expanding the concept or the definition and areas of intervention of AAFBF. So perhaps Start Network can say, this is how to integrate it beyond it. And let me take off on exactly what you mentioned. How are we positioning AAFBF? Is it an external financing from global sources bypassing national, directly going to communities? Because if it will become a permanent financing mechanism, there will have to be a strategic level risk layering that it will be complementary to what LGUs are doing. Exactly that you're going to reverse. So there must be a policy thrust along that line, that it might become a permanent financing intervention that will be complementary to, number one, LGUs, second, national financing. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it okay if I? So thank you very much for that very, very good summary. So actually, I have to emphasize that the last point that you mentioned, that's one of the big points of reflection that is a core finding in our evaluation. Where does Start Network envision itself, Start Network Philippines envision itself in the AA ecosystem within the Philippines in the future, right? So that's a long-term discussion actually. So and there are layers. Of course, there's at the national level, and when we were talking to the stakeholders, like Start Network has mentioned, and even the LGUs, right? When we ask them, can you champion this? just to look at the sustainability, because Start Network cannot do this forever, I think, right? I mean, at the end of the day, maybe the goal is to just generate evidence that, hey, anticipatory action works. Let's give this instrument to those who are more empowered and who are the duty bearers to actually do it, right? But in that regard, the remaining stumbling block for the LGUs, and I think a lot of you already know this, is number one, it also depends on the local chief executive. So the changing political landscapes, that's very important. And then they mentioned that in terms of the championship, at the technical level, they're prepared and they want to do it. The question is there capacity to do it? And then the third bit is the financial constraints to do it, right? So they are saying, we just don't have the budget, and at the same time, there's no law, as you mentioned, that allows us to disburse this amount of money before a typhoon. And then just finishing that off, how does Start Ready position itself within the ecosystem? In at least what we saw in Cagayan, and probably there are different ways that we still need to generate the evidence, is that anticipatory action as a forecast-based finance is, for Start Ready specifically, they want it given before the onset of the typhoon, because this allows the people to buy what they need, to get access to the basic things that they need. But then there's also the early response, which is, wait, we still have some money to disburse and people still need help. So let's give them early response capacity. So that's it. Thank you.
I'm so sorry, but we have run out of time. But I do see a few hands. Recognize Ms. Naomi and Ms. Eula if you have any further questions. And please catch them during lunch or during the break to discuss more. Thank you so much.